And thank you for joining us. Okay, just having some technical difficulties. Just bear with me a second. Get this. Okay. Okay, there we are. Alrighty, I'm going to start. Hello, this is Sexual Healing Central presenting Sex and Menopause. This is a new series, and I am really, really thrilled to start this whole new series with you all. I'm just seeing who's here. Excellent, excellent. And there we go. I'd love to just have an open invitation for people to come up on the stage and ask any questions. That's the beauty of doing this show live. So I'm very, very happy about that. So let me introduce myself and introduce the show to you. So I'm Laura Zam, and I'm a sexuality educator and author of a book called The Pleasure Plan. And I am here now doing this podcast. This is our very, very first episode. And it is an episode, it is a series where we are talking about sex and menopause. And I'd love to just pose a question, throw it in the chat, and yes, thank you so much. Put something in the chat or talk to and come up on the stage and tell me what it is that you are curious about with regard to this topic, with regard to your own body, your partner, someone you know. We're all dealing with this in some way. Somebody in our life is definitely dealing with this. So, okay, why sex and menopause, and why the theme for this particular episode, which is sex better after menopause? So I posed that question for our inaugural episode for two reasons. The first reason is that surprisingly, this question gets a ton of inquiries on Google. There's a lot of searches with regard to this particular question. So obviously there's tons of curiosity about this. That's the first reason. And the second reason is because even though there are these assumptions, or even though there are these questions and searches, there's also kind of a universal assumption that sex is going to decline. Sexual activity is going to decline. Sexual experience is going to decline after menopause for people who are in menopausal bodies. And so I want to just really address that head on by having this first episode be about sex and the quality of sex as we age. So in answer to the question, does sex get better, or is sex better after menopause? I have to say, yes. The answer to the question is yes. It does get better. It is better after menopause. And for the rest of this episode, I want to explain why that is, and how you can make it so. Because sex is not automatically better after menopause. Menopause presents an opportunity to recreate, basically, sex that may have fallen fallow, or sex that might have gotten not so great because of menopausal changes, hormonal changes. So It is, I think, a crossroads. And I think it is an opportunity for sexual awakening. But we have to really seize that opportunity and use our strategies and use tools that we acquire and new frameworks and new knowledge in order to really take advantage of that opportunity. So let me talk about a few things that happen during menopause physiologically, and that will give us a nice context to see how we can use these changes, which are not that great on the surface, how we can use those as an opportunity to kind of turn this situation around, or turn it around to the extent that make it work in our favor. So in a nutshell, nature does not want people in women's bodies, women, to reproduce past a certain age. The eggs are not that viable, and maybe there's more of a likelihood that there will be genetic defects. And so to prevent that from happening, nature does a lot of things to us. It basically takes our hormonal levels way down, and there are a lot of repercussions because so much of our sexual organs need those sex hormones, to thrive. And so when we don't have those sex hormones, in particular estrogen and also testosterone, when we don't have those sex hormones, then what we have is a situation where those tissues are going to have a bit of a time. They're going to change, but also the vagina itself starts to narrow and also shorten. So nature's like really getting in there and trying to create big obstacles so that women and other people who have vaginas and vulvas do not reproduce. So we now call the changes that happen after menopause or going into menopause, we can say roughly after the age of 45, we now call this genitourinary syndrome of menopause, or GSM. It used to be that different changes had different kinds of names. But in 2014, there was a change in terminology that was led by the North American Menopause Society and also the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health. They led the way in advocating for a change in terminology, for a blanket term for all the changes that happen after, let's say, the age of 45. So basically going into menopause, which we call perimenopause, and then postmenopause. So there are many, many changes or many things that are part of this syndrome because of this depletion of hormones. I mentioned the vagina can get narrower and even shorter. There can be dryness in vaginal tissue and also in the vulva. There can be a thinning in the tissue, less elasticity. There can be skin conditions that one is more prone to. There can be a proliferation of nerves, more sensitivity right outside the vagina and also around the clitoris. So lots and lots of things. There can be a greater tendency to have different kinds of infections, bacterial infections and yeast infections, because the pH is now different. And the pH, when it was a bit more acidic, or a lot more acidic because of the estrogen particularly, it was helping to prevent these infections. It was creating more of an environment that was not hospitable to certain kinds of growth, basically, bacterial and yeast growth. So we can have, greater tendency towards infection. So there's a lot of things. This is not my list is not complete in terms of all the things that happen because of GSM, again, which is genitourinary syndrome of menopause. Lots of things are going on, and because of that, there can be pain as well. There can be pain, especially because the vagina's somewhat smaller, perhaps. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that the muscles can react to any kind of pain that we've had and go into a kind of overdrive, get very, very tight, and especially if there has been some kind of existing weakness in those pelvic floor muscles. And most everybody, unless you're really working them out, has weakness in those pelvic floor muscles. So there can be a kind of shutdown, which then creates even more pain because the muscles themselves can exacerbate pain and be like another layer of pain. So bottom line, intercourse or penetration can be painful. And this is a big reason why women and other people going through menopause might choose to not have sex or not have penetrative sex. And the way it often goes, is that the pain might be there for some time and it might sneak up on a person, and then they don't necessarily communicate this to a partner. And finally, they bring it up and start to talk about it with a doctor, maybe, and start to get remedies, but it might have already degenerated a little bit. Now, I should say that the remedies are fantastic, and future episodes will go into great detail about remedies, in particular hormonal remedies for GSM. Which there's fear around, but I won't really want to clear that up because there's great safety that they're finding around, especially hormones that you just put in the vagina around the vulva. But we have a situation now where there are these changes. It's not like we have a choice whether or not there are going to be changes. What those changes, how they affect us in particular, is going to be unique to each person, but GSM is going to affect everyone who is going through menopause to some extent, even if it's just changing that pH and giving us a greater tendency for infection. So everybody's going to have a bit of this, is going to have GSM and some symptoms. And for many people, that means that they're going to say, okay, I'm done. Along with this, when we're going through menopause, that time in our lives, there might be a lot of stresses. Because of where we are in our parenting, because of where we are in terms of maybe parents that are aging, where we are in terms of our relationship. If we've been in a long-term relationship, then it may already be that sex has not been that spicy because of other factors. And now when you throw pain on top of that, there can be a tendency for people to say, I'm done. Hasn't been that great. And now there's pain. I'm done. So that's where many, many, many women and other people who go through menopause find themselves at this crossroads. The body is going this way, and they have decided that, or they think that they have only one path, and that path is to just go along with that, just let things kind of die. But there is another path, and the other path is to use this opportunity, use menopause as an opportunity for sexual awakening. So there's already things that have to be dealt with. right? Because you've got now pain, you've got some kinds of maybe existing problems that are now coming to the fore. So there's already, right, there's already something that needs our attention. Whereas before menopause, we may have just said, well, all right, sex is not great, but all right, there's no reason really to intervene. I'm just going to kind of let things go fallow in my relationship, sex-wise. But when menopause comes, you really have to make a choice, because if you do not start to remedy what's going on, then this situation, the GSM, is going to basically going to give us more and more of these kinds of symptoms, close up the vagina even more, right? Have those tissues be even thinner or drier. There's going to be a deterioration in our condition, basically, and it's going to make it even more and more difficult for us to have sex. So if we want to continue having sex, if we are not ready to give up sex for the rest of our lives, and in particular penetrative sex, then we have to do something about this. And that's why menopause is like a wake-up call. So let me talk a little bit about my own situation and how I came to do all this and be so fascinated and come on here once a week on Thursdays and talk about sex. So I got married for the first time when I was 46 years old. I spent 3 decades searching for love and never really managed to have a sustainable long-term relationship. A lot of that had to do with the fact that I had a history of sexual trauma and I didn't know how to heal from it. I also had pain with intercourse from the first time that I attempted this when I was 17 years old. So I had 30 years of pain. I had no idea what it was caused by. I just felt like I was broken, and that was a big reason why my relationships were not so great for 30 years. But then I met Kurt. Kurt is my wonderful husband. I met him when I was just about to turn 43, and we got married basically 3 years later. So when I married Kurt, I had already sexual pain, and it started to get worse and worse. But because I'd had pain my whole life, I didn't think that there was anything unusual. It was a little bit different, more burning than, let's say, different kinds of, felt like tearing before. Now it felt like tearing and burning. So I wasn't really sure what was going on. But because I'd just gotten married, I decided I wanted to have a healthy sex life. I'd waited 30 years to have a great relationship, and now I had a great relationship, and I wanted physical intimacy to be a part of that. So I went on a journey to figure out what the heck was going on. Was this trauma from my childhood that was unresolved? Is that the reason I had this pain my whole adult life? Was it that I didn't know anything about female sexuality and sexual response, pleasure? Was it that I just didn't know anything about marriage? I hadn't had, like I said, any successful relationships before, successful long-term relationships. So maybe there was something about marriage itself that was the culprit. I had no idea. So I went on a journey to discover what was going on. And what I found was that I had some existing pelvic floor dysfunction, tightness and weakness in the pelvic floor that's called vaginismus. I also had probably some existing vulvar pain, which is called vestibulodynia, and I'll talk about all these things in future episodes. But I also had GSM, genitourinary syndrome of menopause. That was going on, and it was exacerbating. it was exacerbating these other existing issues. So I decided that I would, like I said, I would figure this all out. I didn't decide at the time, okay, going into perimenopause, and so I'm going to figure this out. That was after the fact that I realized that, oh, this was a perfect time. This was an opportunity. And I could basically encourage other women who are around that age or older to also go on a pleasure plan, because that's what I called my book, The Pleasure Plan, because I was going to make a plan to take the reins of this situation and figure out how to have great sex. Figure out how to have great sex for the first time in my life. So because of that journey, which I went on and was very elaborate, I worked with 15 different kinds of practitioners, and I tried 30 different healing modalities or pleasure-inducing modalities. Because of that, I learned a tremendous amount about women's sexuality, about pleasure, and about menopause. And so all of that knowledge has taught me that solving these problems, these genital problems and relationship problems at menopause, leading up to, going into, and post-menopause, all of these have fantastic solutions. But as I said before, a person really has to make a decision that they are going to, at this crossroads, choose to have sex for the rest of their lives, or at least choose to have sex for the next few years or the next time being, or choose to have sex for as long as they want to have sex. So how do you do that? Well, the first thing that we need to do is we need to talk to our partners if we have them and tell them what's going on, especially if we have been avoiding sex. And if we've been avoiding sex because of these different changes, pain that we're feeling. If we have not been avoiding sex and we've been having pain and suffering in silence, yes, especially we need to talk to our partners. If we are not partnered, then we need to talk to ourselves, have a conversation with ourselves and say, what do we want out of sexual relationships? And what do we want out of our relationships? Do we want to start dating? Do we want a partnership? Nobody's forcing anyone to have a partnership, or if you're in a partnership, to have sex. But if you do want that, it's something that starts with that conversation with ourselves and with our partners, because there are other things that we need to put in place. The next thing we need to put in place is to find a really good medical provider who is going to help us decipher what GSM is doing to our bodies in particular. Unfortunately, many gynecologists don't have a tremendous amount of knowledge and training when it comes to menopause. So you can try first talking to your gynecologist, but if your gynecologist doesn't have sufficient information, if you don't feel satisfied, you're not finding relief, it's likely that your physician will prescribe hormones, topical meaning that you put them directly into the vagina. That's usually what doctors will recommend. But if you find that that's not enough, that that's not really working, then we want to ask our doctors if we can have a prescription to see a pelvic floor physical therapist. So that's where we want to go. sometimes it's a really good idea to just get over to a pelvic floor physical therapist as soon as possible, because those pelvic floor physical therapists often are the best diagnosticians when it comes to what's going on. If there are pelvic floor, like muscular things going on, or if something has to do with maybe like overactive nerves, even helping you decipher if something is not those things, because then maybe it has to do with some other things that are going on, some kinds of inflammation, for instance, maybe something having to do with the bladder or infections, things like that. So we want to see if we can get a good practitioner, a physician, and or a pelvic floor physical therapist. Those two, talking to our doctors, talking to our partners, and talking to ourselves, so those three are going to really be the perfect place to start, to put in place first more knowledge about what it is that's going on, and also what those remedies might be. Once we make this decision that we do want to have sex, we're going to go down a path to make that work for us. Physiologically, make that work for us so that it's comfortable, so that there's no pain, so that we can address any kinds of other issues that might be going on, like recurrent infections or something like that. So we're going to work this physiologically, but also by initiating conversation with ourselves and with our partners, we're also going to start to put attention on things that we could do to get in contact with our sensuality, to maybe bring that relationship back, really have more of a relationship with our own sexuality, eroticism, etc., even just pleasure. So we want to start to cultivate that. And we want to start to cultivate some other maybe movement forward with our partners, especially if things have gotten maybe not so spicy or even not so active in our sex life. So to sum things up, sex can be better after menopause. I found that sex was much better after menopause because menopause gave me the opportunity to solve all of these sex problems, but also it gave me the impetus to find out what is pleasurable for me. What do I want out of a sexual relationship? It gave me a lot of agency and voice because I use that opportunity. I use this, right, these changes as a catalyst. So I hope you have enjoyed our first episode of Sex and Menopause. I'll be here every week talking about different aspects. I'll have guests on. You can find me at laurazam.com. And I hope that you will come back and see us sometime. I'm your host, Laura Zam, author, sexuality educator, and person who is very, very committed to helping people view menopause as a sexual awakening. All right. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.